All right, imagine this. You're fresh out of the academy, those platoon leader bars gleaming on your chest, and it's your first patrol as a leader.
Exciting, right?
Exhilarating, but maybe a little daunting too. Good thing you brought your trusty ADP 390 along.
Always got to have the manual.
We're diving deep into Chapter 5 today. Enabling operations. Think of it as your field guide to not just surviving, but really thriving out there.
And that's the key, isn't it? ADP 390, it gives you the framework, the tools, but thriving in the field. That means applying it when the pressure's on, turning those pages into action, decisive action.
It's one thing to ace a test on this stuff, but it's another to use it when the stakes are real.
Yeah.
So let's say my first mission as a platoon leader involves setting up an ambush. What's the first thing on my checklist?
Well, before you even think about that ambush, you got to know where the enemy is, right? What they're doing and what they might do if they catch wind of you. That's where reconnaissance comes in, which Chapter 5 really digs into.
So recon isn't just for specialized teams then.
No way, not at all. ADP 390 really hammers home the point that at the platoon level, reconnaissance is everyone's job all the time.
Yeah.
Continuous, never in reserve, as the book says. I can already see that one sinking in with my squad leaders, that constant awareness, even when we're just setting up camp.
Yeah, it's easy to get complacent to think we're safe here, but that's how ambushes become your problem.
Speaking of ambushes, if I am setting one up, that's got to be where the whole orient on objectives part of reconnaissance gets real, right?
You got it. If your ambush depends on the enemy hitting a specific choke point at a certain time, well, what information is key to making that happen? What do your soldiers need to be locked onto? It's about focused observation, not just glancing around.
So I need to drill it into my squad leaders. If they see something, they say something. But just as important, they
Yeah.
say it clearly. Couldn't agree more. Report rapidly and accurately. Another gem from ADP 390. And for good reason, inaccurate or delayed reports, they can be disastrous. Imagine one of your squad leaders radios in about enemy activity, but the location's off or the details are vague. What could happen?
Let's just say it wouldn't be pretty.
Not pretty at all. Bad intel, it's almost worse than no intel, because it leads to bad decisions, and those have consequences. It's on you as the leader to establish that culture of clear, concise reporting from day one.
Good communication seems to be a theme here in ADP 390.
Underpins everything. Okay, so let's say you've done your recon, you've got the enemy's location, but holding that position, that means securing it, which ADP 390 dedicates a whole section to.
So from finding the enemy to protecting ourselves, does that mean perimeter defenses, patrols, things like that?
It's about shifting your mindset, really, from information gathering to force protection. Now, it's not just about what the enemy is doing. It's about making your force as safe as possible. Picture your platoon setting up a patrol base for the night. That's area security, defining a perimeter, setting up those observation posts, and taking measures to protect the whole platoon.
Got it. Now, what about those other terms? ADP 390 talks about cover, guard, screen.
I'll be honest, those always trip me up a bit back in training.
Sure, they've got some nuance to them. Imagine your squad is providing cover for a larger unit, like they're advancing on an objective. Their mission is to engage the enemy, buy time, not hold terrain. That's cover, independent maneuvering. But if they're guarding the company command post, their focus shifts to close protection. They're tied to the main body, relying on its support. Then there's a screen, which is all about early warning, giving your platoon as much time as possible to react if the enemy advances.
So like a tripwire, giving us time to prepare. Exactly. And here's the thing. This is where your judgment as a platoon leader is tested. The balance between security and firepower.
Because more security means fewer guys on the objective. Tough call, especially for a new lieutenant.
It is. And ADP 390 gives you the principles, not a magic formula. It's up to you to analyze the situation, consider the terrain, the enemy, and make the call. But remember, you've got your platoon sergeant, your squad leaders, and the training you've received to help make those tough decisions.
It's reassuring to know I won't be alone out there. Okay, so we found the enemy, or at least we think we have, secured our position. Now we have to actually get to our objective, and that's where troop movement comes into play.
Right on. But it's not as simple as just loading everyone onto a truck. This is tactical movement we're talking about.
So what am I looking at as a platoon leader? What are the big things to keep in mind when I'm planning troop movement?
Well, ADP 390 distinguishes between a tactical road march and an approach march. Your mindset as a platoon leader has to shift depending on which one you're doing. Think of a tactical road march as getting your platoon where they need to be quickly and efficiently. The threat might be lower, but it never goes away. An approach march, however, means you're closing in on the enemy, anticipating contact. Every movement is driven by tactics.
So even when we're just moving, we're still in that combat mindset, always alert.
Always. You're thinking about cover, concealment, what you'll do if you encounter the enemy. Then there's movement control.
Which is,
Yeah.
don't judge me, I just got these bars.
No judgment here. It's basically how the larger unit coordinates everybody's movements on the battlefield. Believe me, it's a huge deal. You need to be aware of movement control because it affects your timeline, your route, even where you can and can't go.
Like a giant, intricate puzzle, and I'm holding one of the pieces.
Precisely. Understanding movement control can be the difference between a successful mission and, well, a complete disaster. But don't worry, we'll unpack that more in a bit.
Because, speaking of moving around the battlefield, what happens when we need to take over a position from another unit? That's where relief in place comes in, right?
That's right. In ADP 390, it really stresses how important a smooth transition is during a relief in place. Any hiccups, any confusion, that's when the enemy can take advantage.
So it's more than just like swapping places on a map.
Oh, way more. Imagine you're rolling up to relieve a platoon that's been holding a tough position for days. What are the things you, as the incoming leader, absolutely need to know?
Well, the enemy situation, for sure. Their location, strength, what they've been up to lately, the terrain to obstacles, flanking roads, all that. And knowing where my guys are, the friendly units nearby. Oh, and how do I reach higher command if things go sideways? Communications.
You're speaking the language of ADP 390 right there. It's about taking full responsibility, not just for a piece of land, but for the mission and the soldiers under your command.
But ADP 390, it also talks about different types of relief in place, right? Back in training, that's where things got a little fuzzy for me.
It does get into the weeds a bit. There are three main types: sequential, simultaneous, and staggered. Sequential is just what it sounds like. Each element of the relieved unit, they're replaced one after another. Simultaneous, everyone switches out at the same time. And staggered is a bit more, well, flexible. Depends on the tactical situation.
So if the enemy is really active on one flank, I might prioritize swapping out those guys first.
Exactly. A simultaneous relief, it's the fastest, but might be too obvious to the enemy. Sequential or staggered can be stealthier, but they take more time. As a new platoon leader, understanding these little details, that's critical because you might be the one calling the shots on how that relief goes down.
No pressure, right?
That's the job. Now, on the flip side, what if your platoon needs to move through another unit's lines? We call that a passage of lines, and coordination is absolutely key.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster if someone messes up.
You said it. You're basically passing through another unit's area of responsibility. Clear communication is vital to prevent, well, friendly fire. ADP 390, it's all about making sure everyone's on the same page.
So, no room for assumptions on a passage of lines. But just like with a relief in place, there's got to be a moment when responsibility shifts from one commander to the other. How does that work during a passage of lines?
You're right, it's not a free-for-all out there. Typically, the transfer of authority happens when about 2/3 of your platoon has moved through. But the key is that it's clearly communicated and agreed upon by both commanders before anything happens. No ambiguity. You, as the platoon leader, need to know exactly when you're officially in charge of that piece of the battlefield.
Makes sense. Don't want to be caught flat-footed. Speaking of firepower, we've scouted, secured, and moved our platoon, but what about when we need some extra muscle? That's where fire support comes in, right?
Absolutely. And this is where ADP 390 reminds us that a platoon leader has access to some serious firepower. Mortars, artillery, close air support. But the key is knowing how and when to use it effectively, responsibly.
So not just calling for fire support on every target, but knowing which ones will have the biggest impact on the battle.
Exactly. ADP 390 emphasizes what it calls high payoff targets. Let's say you've got limited fire support and multiple enemy elements are closing in. A machine gun nest, a squad of infantry, a technical vehicle. How do you prioritize?
Yeah, I can see where this gets tricky. It's not just about identifying targets. It's about understanding the bigger picture, what my commander is trying to achieve.
You got it. This is where your tactical judgment comes into play. Are those infantry pinning us down, or is that technical about to flank our position? ADP 390 gives you the tools to make those judgment calls under pressure.
Okay, so I've identified my high-value target. What's next? How do I actually call for fire support?
Communication is key here again. ADP 390, it provides a standardized format for those requests. Makes sure everyone's on the same page, from your forward observer to the guys pulling the triggers miles away.
And that clear communication with my guys on the ground, my forward observer, my platoon sergeant, that's just as important.
100%. You're the link between your platoon on the ground and the firepower that can change the entire course of the battle. But remember, the battlefield, it's unpredictable. Radios malfunction, things change fast. You might have to rely on hand signals or runners,
Talk about a high-pressure situation.
the nature of the beast, right? But ADP 390, it also reminds us that with great power comes great responsibility. We have to be mindful of collateral damage, civilian casualties, damage to infrastructure.
Making sure we're not just winning the battle, but doing it the right way.
Precisely. Positive identification of targets, minimizing unintended consequences, that's crucial. Winning at all costs isn't really winning at all.
Okay, so the fire support lands, hopefully right where we need it.
Hmm.
But the enemy doesn't just give up at that point, right?
Yeah.
We have to be ready to fight through those engagements. What does ADP 390 have to say about leading in the middle of all that chaos?
Right, fire support, it can definitely change the game, but it's not some magic win button.
No auto win, unfortunately.
Oh, and that's where what ADP 390 calls battlefield leadership comes in. Because when the bullets start flying, it's not just about tactics anymore. It's about inspiring your soldiers, keeping them focused, and getting the mission done.
So all those leadership qualities, the ones they drilled into us at the academy, this is where it gets real.
Absolutely, 100%. You're not just managing equipment and resources, you're leading people. And ADP 390, it emphasizes leading by example.
Being right there in the thick of it with them.
You got it. You're out front, sharing the same risks, showing your soldiers that you're right there with them every step of the way.
Actions speak louder than words, for sure,
Yeah.
especially when everything's chaotic. What else does ADP 390 highlight?
Decisiveness. You got to be decisive. When things get hot, you won't always have time or perfect information. You have to make tough calls, trust your gut, and rely on your training.
Knowing that not making a decision, well, that's a decision in itself.
You got it. And of course, communication, we've talked about it a lot, but it's absolutely critical in a firefight. Clear, concise, everyone on the same page.
And not just about giving orders, either.
No way.
It's about listening to those soldiers on the ground, the ones who have eyes on the target.
Couldn't agree more. The best leaders, they're the best listeners. They create that environment where their soldiers feel comfortable speaking up, sharing what they're seeing, and even offering suggestions. Because in all that chaos, sometimes that crucial piece of intel comes from the guy on the front line.
It makes sense, absolutely. But even with the best communication, a well-trained platoon, a solid plan, things still go sideways, right?
That's just the nature of combat. It's fluid, unpredictable, unforgiving. ADP 390 really drives that point home. It emphasizes adaptability and resilience. You got to be able to think on your feet, adjust the plan based on the situation, and keep your platoon moving forward even when you're facing setbacks.
So flexibility,
No,
just as important as firepower.
100%. Have a plan, but be ready to toss it out the window and adapt when you need to.
Sounds like ADP 390 isn't just about the tactical side of combat. It's getting new leaders ready for the mental and emotional toll it takes.
It's one thing to learn tactics from a book. It's another to use them while you're under fire, you know? You're going to be tested physically and mentally, but that's what makes a good leader. The ability to rise to the occasion, to make those split-second decisions, and bring everyone home safe.
So fire support, battlefield leadership, adaptability, resilience, that's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
Is there one big thing you want our listeners to take away from this deep dive into ADP 390?
Remember, this book, it's a powerful tool. It's not just some dusty manual. It's like a roadmap to success on the battlefield. It gives you the knowledge you need to lead effectively, to accomplish the mission, but it's up to you to take that knowledge and apply it in the real world.
The battlefield doesn't care about theory.
Not even a little bit. It's a tough environment, but a solid understanding of ADP 390, the willingness to learn and adapt. You'll be well on your way to being the leader your soldiers deserve.
Taking care of your soldiers, getting the mission done, and making it home safe. That's what it's all about.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, on that note, it's time to wrap up this deep dive into ADP 390. To all our listeners, especially those new platoon leaders heading out there, we're rooting for you. Stay frosty.